Cedric stood at the edge of the rooftop, staring out at the city skyline, feeling empty inside, like he had lost his purpose. Life had been unfair to him. He had lost parents at a very young age, and since none of his other family members wanted him, he was sent to an orphanage. Every day, he watched the other kids get adopted, but no one ever looked his way. None of the kids at the orphanage wanted to play with him either. It was as if he was a plague everyone wanted to avoid, and he could never understand why. When he turned 18, he was sent out of the orphanage to fend for himself. Despite life's unfairness, Cedric persevered, juggling multiple jobs to put himself through university. He clung to the hope that once he graduated and secured a good job, his story might change. That thought kept him going, as he had no one else but himself. But when he finished university, he was left with a mountain of debt. After sending his resume to countless companies, he finally landed an interview with a prestigious one. Cedric poured everything into it, waiting anxiously for the results. Days passed, and just as he felt hope slipping, an email arrived. He'd gotten the job. He wept with joy, finally feeling like life had given him a chance. He started work and dedicated himself to every task. But just 2 weeks later, Cedric was abruptly fired without a clear reason, only to learn he'd been replaced by someone with connections. Now, standing on the rooftop, he felt crushed under the weight of life's cruelty. Why keep trying when the world seemed stacked against him? He wondered if there was even a point. On the other side, Vesper, a ruthless Grim Reaper, had been watching from the shadows, waiting for him to jump. Unlike other Grim Reapers who gently guided souls to the afterlife through a portal, Vesper used his scythe to strike them as they pleaded for a second chance. Vesper enjoyed hunting souls, particularly those who lacked patience and chose to end their lives. He would reveal the bright future that awaited them had they held on, only to slay them as they begged for mercy. His latest target was Cedric, whom he watched intently as he neared the edge of the rooftop, waiting for the moment he'd make the fatal leap. Cedric took one last deep breath, shut his eyes, and leaned forward, letting himself fall. They say that before death, happy memories flash before one's eyes, but for Cedric, there were none. Only memories of suffering and loneliness. When he hit the ground, everything went dark and silent. His soul drifted until it found itself in a dimly lit room. As he stood there, candles flickered to life, illuminating the darkness as footsteps echoed toward him. A tall, imposing figure emerged, exuding an aura of mystery. Vesper, the Grim Reaper, usually thrilled in the terror his presence inspired. Most souls cowered the moment they saw him. But Cedric stood calmly, eyes devoid of fear. "Are you here to take my soul?" he asked. Vesper smirked. "I am, but that would be far too boring if I did it now." With a snap of his fingers, the candles extinguished, and a scene appeared on the wall, showing Cedric what his future might have been if he'd stayed alive. Vesper expected scenes of success and happiness that would make Cedric beg for another chance, but instead, Cedric's future was just as bleak. A life of struggle and loneliness until his last breath. Cedric watched without a hint of emotion. Disappointed, Vesper snapped his fingers, and the candles relit. "Don't you regret it?" he asked. "Don't you want a second chance?" Cedric shook his head. "No, you can take my soul." Vesper raised his scythe, ready to strike, but then hesitated. For the first time in his soul-reaping career, he felt a pang of pity. It seemed cruel to send Cedric to the afterlife in such a painful way after a life filled with suffering. Lowering his scythe, Vesper decided instead to guide him to the afterlife through a portal, as most reapers did, a passage that offered the possibility of rebirth. As he opened the portal, Vesper said, "I've never done this for anyone, and I don't know why I'm doing it now, but I wish you happiness in your next life." Cedric managed a faint smile and stepped through the portal, disappearing into the unknown as Vesper watched. The moment Vesper closed the portal, a powerful gust of wind extinguished every candle in the room. He instantly knew who it was, the Grim Master. A voice boomed through the darkness. "What have you just done?" Vesper replied, uncertain. "Send a soul into the afterlife? I know I didn't do it my usual way, but he's in the afterlife now." The Grim Master's tone turned sharp. "You've made a mistake no other Grim Reaper has made. You send a soul back to life." Vesper froze in shock. What? Then, realization dawned on him. The portal he'd opened hadn't led to the afterlife but back to the world of the living. Since he rarely used the portal, he'd mix them up. He dropped to his knees, pleading, "Please forgive me. This is my first mistake." The Grim Master's voice was unyielding. "Your error cannot be forgiven. You must retrieve the soul and send him to the afterlife yourself." Vesper rose to his feet, relieved. "That's simple." The Grim Master's voice cut in before he could relax. "But you'll do it as a human. You'll lose your powers and access to the spirit world until you return that soul." Vesper protested. "Do I really have to go through all this? It's only my first offense." But before he could finish, the Grim Master vanished, taking Vesper's scythe with him. Frustrated, Vesper snapped his fingers to test his powers, only to find himself in a small, shabby room. He looked around and realized he was in Cedric's home. Meanwhile, Cedric awoke in a hospital bed, remembering every detail of his encounter with Vesper, but dismissing it as a vivid dream. Miraculously, he was unharmed, despite his fall from a 6-story building. His first thought was the mounting hospital bills, and he decided to escape. Sneaking past nurses and doctors, Cedric managed to slip out of the hospital and make his way back to his rundown apartment. As he opened the door, he froze. He thought it wasn't possible for someone he saw in his dreams to appear in real life and concluded he was an intruder. Cedric asked, "Who are you? And how did you get in here?" Vesper raised an eyebrow. "Who am I? You really don't remember me?" He sighed. "I really hate introductions." Cedric eyed him skeptically. "Are you really the guy from my dream? The one with the scythe?" Vesper smirked. "The one and only." Cedric shook his head, unconvinced. "Honestly, I don't believe you." Determined to prove himself, Vesper decided to pull a scare tactic. He snapped his fingers to vanish and reappear behind Cedric, but instead, he found himself clinging to the ceiling fan. Frustrated, he snapped his fingers again, but nothing happened. Desperately, he snapped several times, cursing under his breath at the Grim Master for taking his powers now of all times. Just then, the ceiling fan gave out, and Vesper crashed to the floor with it. Cedric rushed over. "Are you okay?" He reached out to help him up, but Vesper waved him off and got to his feet. Dusting himself off, he declared, "Now do you believe I'm the scythe guy?" Cedric gave a hesitant nod, glancing at his broken fan. Vesper shrugged. "You won't be needing that anyway. I'm here to take you back." "Take me back?" Cedric echoed. Vesper sighed and explained quickly in one breath, "I was supposed to send you to the afterlife, but I accidentally sent you back to life. Because of that, I've been temporarily demoted to human with no powers. So I need you to die again, so I can send you to the afterlife, and reclaim my position as a Grim Reaper." The end. Cedric's eyes widened. "Are you going to kill me?" Vesper shrugged. "Well, I won't have to if you do it yourself. All you need to do is jump from a tall building again. You're tired of how life's treating you, right? You saw the future, you know there's no point." Cedric shook his head. "Please don't take me back. I want to live." Vesper was taken aback. "Why do you suddenly want to live?" Cedric looked up. "I don't know. I just realized. Life itself is a gift. You can kill me if you want, but I won't end my life on my own anymore." Vesper groaned in frustration, stepping closer with every intention of strangling Cedric right then and there. But as he reached out, his hands froze around Cedric's neck. He let out a frustrated sigh, dropping his hands. "Fine. Let's see if you still feel that way after life keeps throwing bowling balls at you." Cedric smiled gently. "You don't have a place to stay, do you? You can take my room tonight. I'll sleep out here. It gets hot without the fan." "Grim Reapers don't sleep," Vesper replied, right before a yawn escaped him. He immediately covered his mouth, looking bewildered. What was that?" Cedric chuckled. "That's called needing sleep." Reluctantly, Vesper followed Cedric into the small, cramped bedroom. Cedric settled himself on the couch. As the night wore on, Vesper tossed and turned in the bed that was too short for his tall frame, while the squeaky fan creaked loudly overhead, grating on his nerves. Finally, he shot up from the bed, frustrated. "I can't do this. I need to take him back so I can return to the spirit world and get my powers back." Marching into the living room, he grabbed a pillow, intending to suffocate Cedric. But the moment he raised the pillow over Cedric's face, he hesitated again. Another sigh escaped him as he tossed the pillow aside and headed out into the night, needing fresh air and a clear mind to think of another plan to end Cedric's life. The next morning, Vesper returned to Cedric's apartment holding a box of milk he'd secretly poisoned. He handed it over, watching Cedric raise it to his lips, only to swipe it from his hand at the last second, sending it splattering on the floor. Throughout the day, Vesper tried different ways to end Cedric's life, each time pulling back at the last moment. Frustrated, he thought, why can't I do this? Is it because I'm human now? Am I feeling human emotions? Ugh, I hate being human. That night, Vesper insisted on sleeping on the couch, but as he lay there, eyes closed, he felt water dripping onto his face. Opening his eyes, he noticed the ceiling leaking, but it wasn't raining. Groaning in frustration, he got up and stormed out. His destination? A mansion of a lonely old man with no family, whose soul he'd reaped. The property, along with its luxury cars, was unclaimed, and Vesper felt a surge of relief. Settling into the master bedroom, he finally relaxed, spreading out comfortably. The next evening, he went to check on Cedric, as he didn't want to miss the chance of being the one to send him to the afterlife, else he would be stuck in the human world as a human. Arriving at the shabby apartment, he found Cedric's belongings scattered outside. Cedric was pleading with the landlord, asking for more time to pay his rent. Vesper's eyes narrowed. This is good chance. Maybe this will make Cedric finally give up. He thought he would feel happy, but he wasn't. His feet moved toward the scene before he even realized it. When the landlord spotted Vesper, he barked, "And who are you? Have you been hiding someone here?" Irritated by the landlord's screeching, Vesper snapped, "Why are you yelling over this house? Do you even consider this a place for a human to live in?" Cedric tried to shush him, but Vesper pressed on. "Nothing works in this place. The roof leaks when it's not even raining, and you have the nerve to demand rent?" The landlord turned on Cedric. "You're just going to stand there while your friend insults me?" Cedric stammered an apology, but Vesper stopped him. "Why are you apologizing? That's it." The landlord fumed. "Pack your things and get out." Vesper rolled his eyes. He was leaving anyway. "Keep your dump of a house, and just pray I'm still human the day you die." Vesper grabbed Cedric's few belongings, took his hand, and walked him out to his new car. As they settled in, Cedric asked quietly, "Why? Why did you help me?" Vesper replied, "Good question. I'm asking myself the same thing." He then asked, "Do you know how to drive? Do you have a license?" Cedric nodded. He made Cedric then drive, as he almost got caught by police on his way there. And he knew humans needed some kind of license to drive. Cedric was nervous as he had never driven such a luxury car, but made it to the address Vesper provided, which was his new home. As they stepped inside the mansion, Cedric looked around, taking in the high ceilings, grand chandeliers, and polished marble floors. He couldn't believe how massive and luxurious everything was. "Is this really your house?" he asked. Vesper nodded. He wasn't going to tell him it belonged to a lonely old man who died in there. Cedric thanked Vesper for helping him and promised to find a job immediately and move out. Vesper replied, "Don't thank me. I only helped because I need to keep an eye on you. I'll be doomed if I lose track of you." Cedric smiled softly. "I still need to thank you." He paused, realizing he didn't even know Vesper's name yet. He asked Vesper for his name, and Vesper reluctantly told him. Cedric also told his name, and Vesper replied, "I know." Then, gesturing to the mansion's many rooms, he said, "Feel at home. Choose whatever room you want," and walked off. The next morning, Vesper woke up to find Cedric mopping the floors. He stalked over, taking the mop from him. "What are you doing?" "Cleaning," Cedric replied. "It's the only way I can repay you for now. I don't want to be a freeloader." Vesper sighed. "I didn't bring you here to be my maid. If I needed one, I would have hired one," Cedric responded. "It's just, the place looked a bit dusty." "So you decided to clean the entire mansion by yourself?" Vesper asked. Cedric answered, "I've cleaned bigger spaces than this alone." Vesper muttered, "Why am I even being nice to you?" and turned to return the mop. Cedric followed him, asking, "Can I at least help in some way? Maybe cook?" "I won't feel right if I just sit around," Vesper scoffed. "I don't eat human food," but as if on cue, his stomach growled. Cedric stifled a laugh. "Your stomach says otherwise," heading to the kitchen. Upon opening every cabinet and drawer, Cedric found them completely empty. Vesper walked over and said, "Let's go shopping." He took all the cash he found in the mansion's safe, and soon they were driving to the nearest mall. In the car, Cedric handed Vesper a chocolate bar to stave off his hunger. Vesper took it, acting reluctant, and after a bite, remembered Cedric hadn't eaten since morning either. Since Cedric was busy driving, Vesper held the bar up for him to take a bite. Cedric was taken aback and almost crashed. Vesper asked him to focus on the road. He didn't want to die as a human. Their first stop was clothes shopping, where Vesper encouraged Cedric to pick whatever he liked, though Cedric declined. Undeterred, Vesper chose clothes and shoes he thought would look good on Cedric, making him try each one, and they all suited him well. In the end, Vesper bought them all, along with his own selections. Then, he went to pick up a new phone for himself and one for Cedric, though Cedric tried to refuse, insisting his phone was fine. Vesper eyed it and said, "That phone looks like it's hanging on for dear life. I want to be able to reach you when you're not with me." He bought it anyway. Finally, they headed to pick up groceries and essentials for the house before returning home. After they returned home, Cedric prepared his best dish for Vesper. Though Vesper tried to act indifferent, he soon devoured the food, unable to hide his enjoyment. "Do all human foods taste this good?" he asked. Cedric smiled, pleased. He loved seeing people enjoy his cooking. When Vesper finished, Cedric moved to clear the dishes, but Vesper stopped him, saying he could handle it himself. Over the next few days, Cedric insisted on helping, and they ended up cleaning the house together. Though Cedric kept searching for jobs without success, Vesper encouraged him to take a break, but Cedric explained he had debts to settle. Vesper was slowly getting used to human life, and without realizing it, was growing fond of Cedric, almost forgetting his mission. One day, as they left the grocery store after shopping, Vesper suddenly covered his face, hiding from 3 people watching them. Cedric turned to see 2 men and a woman, who seemed suspicious. As they approached, Vesper hurried Cedric along, but they quickly caught up. "Vesper, we know it's you," one of them said. Vesper uncovered his face and responded with a sarcastic, "Congratulations." The group, Lysander, Loki, and Helga, former Grim Reapers who used to follow Vesper around, finding him cool, demoted to humans, stared in shock, surprised to see Vesper living among humans. Cedric, curious, asked who they were, and they introduced themselves as Vesper's friends. Smiling, Cedric invited them for dinner before Vesper could clarify. The 2 men immediately hopped into the car, with Helga attempting to sit up front until a glare from Vesper made her join them in the back. Throughout the drive, they could see Vesper's glare in the rearview mirror. Once at the house, Loki nearly blurted out about the old man dying there, but Vesper quickly clapped a hand over his mouth. As they sat down to eat, Helga's curiosity got the best of her. She asked Vesper what had led to his demotion, to which he briskly replied, "It's only temporary." Cedric then admitted it was his fault, explaining what happened. The 3 stared at Vesper, stunned. The ruthless, perfect Vesper had gone easy on a soul, even making a mistake. "So, you get your powers back once he dies again?" Lysander asked, earning swift kicks from Helga and Loki under the table. Vesper quickly changed the subject, urging everyone to eat. The moment they tasted Cedric's cooking, their eyes lit up. They declared it was the best meal they'd had since becoming human, with Helga even urging Cedric to open his own restaurant. Vesper noticed Cedric's brief excitement at the idea, which faded as he mentioned he couldn't afford it. The 3 offered to work for him when he did, admitting how hard it was living as jobless humans. Cedric promised to call them if he ever got the chance to open a place. After the meal, the 3 got up to leave, thanking Cedric and telling him they'd love to come again. As they turned to go, Vesper grabbed them by their collars, saying, "Didn't your parents teach you to clean up after yourselves?" They shrugged, replying, "We don't have parents." Vesper shot them a stern look, pulling them back to wash the dishes, while he made Cedric sit back and relax. Days passed, and one day, Vesper saw Cedric looking up food recipes and restaurant management tips online. Vesper walked up, and Cedric quickly closed his laptop. "Do you actually want to open your own restaurant?" Vesper asked. Cedric gave a small smile. "It's always been a dream I had to wake up from. I love seeing people happy when they enjoy the food I make. It makes me happy. At least I get to see you all enjoy the meals I cook." Vesper stood there in silence, then walked away. A week later, Vesper asked Cedric to come with him to a place. They stopped in front of an empty building, and Vesper said, "This is the place." Confused, Cedric followed him inside, only to be greeted by confetti from Loki, Helga, and Lysander. Cedric looked at them puzzled. As Vesper explained, it was his new restaurant, after some renovations. Cedric was speechless as Vesper explained. He'd bought the place for him to start his own restaurant. Cedric protested. "I can't take it. This is too much. How did you even afford it?" Vesper asked, "Do I look like someone who struggles for money?" Cedric shook his head and Vesper added, "It's already been paid for, so you have to." "I wanted to renovate it, but I thought it best to leave the design up to you. Honestly, it's because I'm out of money. You'll have to take care of me now, so you better make a lot of profit serving your delicious food. I'll be depending on you." Cedric started to object, but Vesper interrupted, "And meet your new employees, who will also help with the renovations, because I had no more money to hire anyone." Helga, Lysander, and Loki waved enthusiastically. Finally, Vesper convinced Cedric to accept. To raise the funds, Vesper had blackmailed a Grim Reaper he'd caught involved with a human to retrieve some paintings he had in the spirit world, then sold them all. A few days later, the restaurant renovations were complete. Vesper found himself smiling as he watched Cedric look around the place, grinning with excitement. To get the word out, they held a free tasting event and handed out flyers. The next day, Cedric arrived anxiously for his first official day. Shortly after, Helga and the others joined him, and they all sat by the window, waiting for their first customer. Just as they began to lose hope, their first customer walked in. They eagerly showed her to a table, handed her a menu, and got to work. Cedric as the cook, Lysander and Helga serving, and Loki managing the cash register. Vesper, with nothing specific to do, simply watched. As Cedric served his first customer, he couldn't hide his satisfaction, and soon more people started arriving. The place grew busier, and with Cedric the only one in the kitchen, Helga grabbed Vesper, who was sitting idly, and handed him a big bowl of onions to peel. Vesper's eyes widened. "All of them?" he asked. Cedric jumped in. "You don't have to if I can," Vesper interrupted, though soon, tears filled his eyes from the onions, and he struggled to keep them open. Chuckling, Cedric stepped closer and gently wiped Vesper's eyes with a wet wipe. Vesper's stomach flipped at the closeness and Cedric's touch. Then Cedric spotted a pair of glasses Loki had left behind, put them on Vesper's eyes, and said, "This should help a bit." Still feeling that flip in his stomach, Vesper nodded and went back to peeling. Finally, the busy day came to an end. The restaurant closed, and they all gathered to celebrate their successful first day, with drinks and food made from leftover ingredients. Vesper took a sip of his drink and immediately passed out, leaving everyone staring in surprise. When the celebration wrapped up, Cedric and the others helped carry Vesper to the car. Cedric, who'd avoided alcohol because he was driving, managed to get Vesper home, carrying him to his room and laying him on his bed. Catching his breath, he sat on the edge of the bed and soon found himself gently brushing Vesper's hair back and caressing his face. A soft smile crept onto his lips as he whispered, "Thank you for everything." He leaned down, kissed Vesper's forehead, and whispered goodnight before heading to his own room. Though Vesper had been too drunk to open his eyes, he heard everything Cedric said and felt the kiss on his forehead. A strange flutter filled his chest, and a warm feeling stirred in his stomach. In the following days, Vesper felt these sensations every time Cedric was near, or whenever they made even the slightest physical contact. With each passing day, the feelings grew stronger, but he couldn't quite figure out what it was. The restaurant, though no longer bustling with the grand opening rush, was still doing well. One day, after they'd closed up, Vesper told the others about the strange feelings he'd been experiencing around Cedric, hoping they might have answers since they had more human experience. They all gasped in unison. "Is it a serious illness?" he asked. They shook their heads and told him he was in love with Cedric. Vesper asked, "You mean the kind of love that makes humans act stupid?" They nodded, and Vesper nodded. "Oh." Helga chuckled. "I never thought I'd hear Vesper and in love in the same sentence. But honestly, who wouldn't fall for Cedric? He's so lovable." Vesper's gaze turned sharp. "Do you love him?" he asked. Helga blinked. "Yes, I mean, we all do. as a younger brother. She shot a nervous look at the others, and they all quickly nodded in agreement, laughing nervously. Helga then said, "You know Grim Reapers and humans can't be together. Falling in love is forbidden for Grim Reapers." Vesper shrugged. "But I'm human now, so I can." Lysander chimed in, "But that's only temporary. Grim Master expects you to come back. And do you really think Cedric would love you back, knowing you could kill him at any moment? I wouldn't want to be with someone who wanted me dead." Helga and Loki quickly pinched him to make him stop talking. Just as Cedric entered the room, curious about what they were discussing, the group laughed nervously. Nothing important, they mumbled and hurried out, leaving Cedric and Vesper alone. As they walked out to the car, Vesper turned to Cedric. "Want to grab some ice cream?" Cedric blinked in surprise. "Ice cream?" Vesper nodded. "I haven't tried it since becoming human, and I'm curious why people love it so much." Cedric smiled. "You'll definitely like it too." Vesper pointed down the street. "There's a shop nearby. Let's take a walk there?" Cedric nodded, closing the car door, and they set off. Vesper didn't really care about the ice cream. He just wanted to spend some time alone with Cedric, as it was hard to do with him. Cedric either busy or tired most of the time. As they walked, a group of dogs ran by, nearly bumping into Cedric. Instinctively, Vesper pulled him closer, placing Cedric on the safer side. He didn't let go of Cedric's hand after that, eventually interlocking their fingers. At the ice cream shop, Vesper let Cedric pick a flavor for him, while Cedric chose his favorite mint. Vesper wanted to eat the ice cream slowly to have more time with Cedric, but it melted quickly, forcing him to eat it faster than he wanted, and soon had to head back home. As they walked back, Vesper suddenly stopped. Cedric turned, concerned. "Why'd you stop?" he asked. Vesper looked at him, then asked, "Do you hate me?" Cedric replied instantly, "No, why would I hate you? Why would you think that?" Vesper's gaze softened. "Don't you hate me, knowing I might take your life at any moment?" Cedric shook his head. "No, I hate you when you've brought so much light into my life. I've never genuinely laughed or smiled as much as I have with you. Even if you were to take my life today, I wouldn't hate you. I understand it's what you have to do to go back to where you belong." Vesper said, "I don't want to go back anymore. I want to stay here, as a human, with you." Cedric blinked, surprised. "You don't have to give up your life there for me." Vesper shook his head. "I'm not giving up anything. I just think living as a human is more fun." Cedric's eyes softened. "Are you sure?" "Absolutely," Vesper promised. "You don't need to worry about me ending your life. I won't even think about it." Then, he leaned in and kissed Cedric gently on the forehead. Cedric stepped back, a bit taken aback. Vesper asked, "I shouldn't have done that, right?" Cedric shook his head. "No, it's fine really. I was just caught off guard." Vesper looked apologetic. "I'm sorry. I thought that's how humans sealed promises, but I guess it's not." Cedric chuckled, glancing at him with a mix of amusement and admiration, then grew serious. "Can you stay by my side forever?" "No, never mind." "I will." Vesper cut in quickly. "I won't leave your side until you ask me to." Tears slipped down Cedric's cheeks, and Vesper panicked. "Did I say something wrong?" Cedric shook his head and pulled Vesper into a hug. Vesper, confused, patted his back gently. They walked back to the car and drove back home. The next day, Vesper asked Helga and the others, "What do humans do next after realizing they're in love with someone?" Helga replied, "Well, first you have to find out if he feels the same way. If he does, then you ask him out." Vesper tilted his head. "Ask him out? Like, ask him to get out?" Helga sighed. "What have you learned since you became human?" "Ask him out. Like make him to be your boyfriend, your partner, your lover." "Oh," Vesper replied, nodding thoughtfully. "But what if he doesn't feel the same way?" Helga replied, "Well, let him get to know the real you. Make him feel comfortable and valued around you. And if he doesn't, then you let it go." She added, "Do you even know his favorite food? His favorite flower? His hobbies?" Vesper realized he didn't know anything beyond what Cedric openly showed. At home, printed out a list of everything he wanted to know about Cedric, and knocked on his door. "I realize we've been together for quite some time, but I don't actually know much about you. Could you fill this out when you're free?" Cedric looked through the list, smiling. "Why don't we answer them together?" "Now." Vesper asked, surprised. Cedric nodded. They settled on Cedric's bed, answering questions back and forth. Cedric even asked a few things he was curious to know about Vesper, which weren't on the paper. By the end, Cedric had fallen asleep on Vesper's shoulder. Not wanting to wake him, Vesper stayed still and eventually drifted off too. In the following days, Vesper found many ways to spend more time with Cedric. Every time he tried to confess his feelings, though, the words stuck in his throat. He thought, this is harder than hunting for souls to reap. One night, as Vesper lay in bed, he thought maybe he could confess his feelings through a text if he couldn't say it in person. He typed, "Hey, are you awake?" Cedric replied almost immediately, just about to sleep. Vesper's heart pounded as he typed, "There's something I want to ask you. What is it?" Cedric responded, gathering every bit of courage. Vesper typed, "Will you be my boyfriend?" He shut his eyes, took a deep breath, and pressed send, his heart racing as he imagined Cedric's response. A minute passed with no reply, though he could see Cedric had read the message. Just then, his phone pinged with a simple response, "Yes." Vesper's eyes widened in disbelief, and he had to stop himself from shouting in excitement. He ran to Cedric's door, ready to knock, but quickly rushed back to his room, grinning. Cedric had also come to Vesper's door, only to hesitate and return to his room, leaning against the door with a smile. That night, neither of them could sleep, excitement keeping them awake. The next morning, they emerged from their rooms, ready to leave the house. They exchanged a soft hey, and Vesper noticed the dark circles under Cedric's eyes. He asked, "Did you sleep at all? You look exhausted." Cedric chuckled. "You too." Vesper rubbed the back of his neck, smiling shyly. "I was just too excited to sleep." He took a step closer to Cedric, then quietly said, "I love you." Cedric's eyes widened in surprise as Vesper added, "I thought I should say that in person." Recovering from his shock, Cedric replied softly, biting his lip, "I love you too." Vesper moved closer, their faces inches apart, noses brushing, and as their lips almost touched, he paused and pulled back, saying, "We should get going." Cedric nodded, a disappointment. Vesper really wanted to kiss him, but felt nervous. He'd never kissed anyone before and wasn't sure how to go about it, despite all the movie kiss scenes and tips he'd watched and read. One day at the restaurant, while they were on a break, Cedric called Vesper over. "I made ice cream for the first time. Want to try it?" He leaned in for a taste as Cedric held out the ice cream, but just as he did, Cedric moved the ice cream aside and gave Vesper a quick kiss on the lips. Cedric smiled as Vesper stood there stunned, then leaned in and kissed him again. Vesper blinked, still stunned, and Cedric pressed his lips against Vesper's lips again, this time deeper, slightly parting Vesper's lips open with his, as his hand moved to Vesper's neck, and the other still holding on to the melting ice cream. Vesper's cheeks flushed as he kissed back, letting go of his initial nerves as he pressed his lips more firmly against Cedric's. His fingers traced the line of Cedric's jaw, one hand resting on his waist as they became lost in each other. Suddenly, the door swung open, and Loki, Lysander, and Helga walked in, ready to help clean up. They froze at the sight of Vesper and Cedric wrapped in a passionate kiss. Cedric pulled away immediately, his face flushing with embarrassment, but Vesper's gaze stayed fixed on Cedric's lips, a hungry glint in his eyes. The three exchanged glances, then quickly said, "We saw nothing. Please, continue." Before rushing out with giggles, Cedric glanced down and noticed the ice cream melting all over his hand, and he instinctively tried to pull away to clean up. But before he could move, Vesper tugged him back and pulled him into another kiss, sliding his lips against Cedric's. Their passionate kiss continued until they were breathless. One day while working, a customer walked into the restaurant. Vesper, Loki, Helga, and Lysander exchanged worried glances the moment they saw who it was. It was Edward, another Grim Reaper like them. If Vesper was ruthless, Edward was downright evil, and no other Grim Reaper liked him. He used to be a demon before being demoted to a Grim Reaper after trying to kill his master to take his place. Vesper noticed Edward's eyes on Cedric the entire time, and Edward even flashed Vesper a smirk. When his food was served, Edward took just one bite before spitting it back into the plate and walking out. Vesper immediately followed him outside, finding Edward standing as if waiting for him. "I knew you would follow me out here." What are you up to? Why did you come here? Vesper demanded, visibly annoyed. Edward chuckled in an irritating way. Isn't this place open for everyone? Stop playing around and answer my question, Vesper snapped. Edward's smirk grew wider. All right, if you're that curious. I came here to finish what you're taking so long to do. The Grim Master misses you and wants you back. A mixture of fear and anger surged through Vesper. What do you mean? Don't act dumb. You know exactly what I mean, Edward replied. If I have to spell it out for you, I'm here to kill. What was his name again? Cedric. But don't worry, you'll still have the privilege of reaping his soul yourself. Vesper's eyes flared red with rage as he grabbed Edward's collar tightly. If you so much as touch a single hair on his head, I swear I'll make you regret ever existing. Edward just laughed, unfazed. You can't do anything. Right now, you're just a powerless human. You're no match for me. With a slight push, he sent Vesper flying to the ground. Edward started to walk away, but Vesper, desperate, crawled forward and managed to grab his leg, begging, Please, don't hurt him. I'll do anything you want, but please don't touch him. Edward gasped mockingly and laughed. I never thought I'd see the day. Have you really fallen in love with that human? He shook his head, clearly disappointed. I actually used to look up to you and wanted to be like you when I grow up. With another laugh, Edward effortlessly shook Vesper off his leg. Get up. You're making everyone think I'm bullying you. Then he walked off, leaving Vesper dejected and on the ground. Helga, Lysander, and Loki, who had seen and heard everything, rushed over to help Vesper up. For the first time in his existence, Vesper shed tears, feeling both helpless. The three embraced him as he choked out, What can I do now? I really am useless. They assured him he wasn't useless and promised to help him protect Cedric. After he calmed down, Vesper wiped his face, and they all went back inside. They met Cedric on his way out to look for them. Cedric noticed Vesper's red, puffy eyes and asked, worried, Were you crying? Vesper shook his head. No, have you ever seen me cry? Cedric still wasn't convinced and noticed Vesper's dirty clothes. Did something happen outside? I just fell, Vesper replied. Cedric looked at the others for confirmation, and they all backed Vesper up, saying he had really just fallen. Cedric still looked skeptical, and Vesper moved closer, embracing him tightly. Nothing happened, he said, trying to hold back more tears that threatened to fall again. Vesper debated whether or not to tell Cedric about Edward. He didn't want Cedric living in constant fear, knowing someone out there wanted to kill him. This was different from his situation with Cedric before. Edward wouldn't hesitate to kill Cedric if given the chance. In the days that followed, Vesper stayed by Cedric's side constantly, even sharing Cedric's room with him. When Vesper couldn't be with him, Helga, Lysander, and Loki took turns keeping watch. One day, Vesper had just stepped out briefly, and when he returned, Cedric was nowhere to be found. He asked the others, who pointed to the kitchen, saying he was there, but when they turned, he wasn't. They remarked, He was here just now. Panic surged through Vesper as he quickly ran outside. He didn't know where to start looking, and the others divided to search in different directions. Tears blurred his vision as he ran, terrible thoughts clouding his mind. He showed Cedric's picture to everyone he met, desperately asking if they had seen him, and to his relief, a few people had and directed him where to go. After running around for a while, Vesper finally saw Cedric across the street, holding a shopping bag and waiting to cross. Vesper stopped, sighing deeply in relief, even though his tears wouldn't stop falling. Just then, he saw Edward appear behind Cedric, smirking and looking right at him. Before Vesper could even react, Edward pushed Cedric onto the road just as a large truck approached, hitting him instantly. Vesper ran, disregarding the traffic around him, and reached Cedric, who lay lifeless and bloodied. He shook him, tapping his face, trying desperately to wake him up, his tears falling uncontrollably. As he pulled out his phone to call an ambulance, the surroundings shifted, and he found himself back in his room in the spirit world, the place where he reaped souls. His powers surged back into his body, and his scythe reappeared in his hand. He dropped the scythe immediately as he saw Cedric's soul standing before him. He pulled Cedric into a hug. I'm sorry. I couldn't protect you. Then Edward's mocking voice rang out from the side. Aw, such a heartbreaking scene. The Grim Master's voice followed, echoing around them. This is your last chance. Redeem yourself and come back to your position. Vesper dropped to his knees. I don't want it. Take my powers. Take my scythe, punish me however you want. But please, give him another chance at life. Cedric, looking at Vesper, said, I don't want another chance if you're not coming with me. Vesper stood up and embraced Cedric tightly. I'll always be by your side, even if you can't see me, he promised. The Grim Master then asked Vesper if he was certain about his decision to give up his position. Vesper replied that he was absolutely certain. Just then, a portal opened. The Grim Master spoke again. You may both walk through the portal back to the human world, but know this, you will lose all memories of each other. Vesper, you will also lose all memory of ever being a Grim Reaper. If you agree to these terms, then you may proceed. Cedric's face fell. I'd rather go to the afterlife with my memories of Vesper, the only happy memories I have. I don't want to lose them. Vesper turned Cedric to face him. Do you believe in my love for you? Cedric nodded, and Vesper continued. I'd never forget you, and I won't let you forget me. I promise. He kissed Cedric's forehead. There, promise sealed. Vesper then asked Cedric to go through the portal first, saying he had something to handle before following. Though reluctant, Cedric eventually nodded and stepped through. As soon as Cedric left, Vesper asked the Grim Master for permission to use his scythe one last time. He approached Edward, who tried to hide his fear behind a sneer. Vesper lifted his scythe to strike him, but paused. You've really become human, Edward taunted. You're useless even with a scythe. Vesper smirked before swinging his scythe, beheading Edward in one swift motion. Dropping the scythe afterward, Vesper thanked the Grim Master for granting them another chance and stepped through the portal. Cedric opened his eyes to find Helga, Loki, and Lysander at his side. They called excitedly for the doctor, who confirmed Cedric was perfectly fine and could even be discharged. He mumbled it and realized he remembered everything about him. He hadn't lost his memories. Anxiously, he asked the three where Vesper was. They explained that he was still in a coma. He had also gone unconscious suddenly and hadn't woken up since. It's been almost 2 weeks. Cedric quickly asked to be taken to Vesper's room, where he sat by Vesper's side, taking his hand in his. I was so scared I'd forget you, he said, but I didn't. If you forget me, I'll be really mad. You have to keep your promise. Just then, Vesper's hand twitched, and his eyes slowly opened. The doctors rushed in, and after a checkup, they confirmed he was also perfectly fine. Overwhelmed with joy, Cedric hugged Vesper tightly, but Vesper didn't hug him back, instead asking in confusion, Who are you? Cedric pulled back, staring at Vesper, waiting for him to say it was a joke. But Vesper's expression was genuinely blank. He didn't remember Cedric or anyone else. Tears welled up in Cedric's eyes as he hit Vesper's shoulder. You liar. You promised you wouldn't forget me. I remember you. Why would you forget me? Vesper let Cedric hit him, feeling a strange ache in his chest as he watched him cry despite not recognizing him. I'm sorry, he said softly. Cedric's tears only fell harder. How could you forget me so easily? He cried. All Vesper could do was repeat, I'm sorry. Cedric and Vesper were both discharged from the hospital, with Vesper leaving with them even though he didn't remember them. During the drive home, Helga, Loki, and Lysander told Vesper all about his life as a Grim Reaper and his time with Cedric. Though skeptical about the Grim Reaper part, Vesper still reluctantly believed them. Cedric remained silent throughout the ride. Once home, Cedric went straight to his room. Days passed, and Vesper still showed no sign of remembering anything. Cedric tried everything, reenacting memories they shared together, hoping to trigger something, but nothing worked. The only memory he hadn't tried was the painful one of Edward pushing him into the street to be hit by a car. Desperate for Vesper to remember him, Cedric asked for the others' help to recreate that moment. With everything arranged, Loki led Vesper to stand across the street, while Cedric took his place on the other side, with Lysander preparing to pretend to push him forward. As Cedric stepped into the street, Vesper's body moved instinctively. Without thinking, he ran towards Cedric and caught him in an embrace. As he held Cedric, flashes of the past came flooding back, the horror of watching Cedric hit by the truck, and the despair of holding Cedric's lifeless body. All at once, every lost memory returned to him as he tightened his arms around Cedric. Cedric pulled back slightly, looking up at him. Did you remember something? Vesper nodded, hugging him again. I'm so sorry, Cedric. I'm sorry I didn't keep my promise. How could I forget you? Cedric's eyes widened in relief, tears spilling down his cheeks. He embraced Vesper, lightly hitting Vesper's back, words failing him. Vesper hugged him tightly in return, both of them crying as they clung to each other. The others gathered around, asking if Vesper remembered them too. He teased them at first, pretending he didn't, before finally saying he did. Vesper and Cedric walked back home hand in hand, not letting go of each other. As soon as they entered the house, Vesper pulled Cedric into his arms, gently cupping his face before leaning in to kiss him. I missed you, he murmured against Cedric's lips. Cedric then said, I was ready to make you fall in love with me all over again if you never regained your memories. Vesper replied, you wouldn't have needed to. I fell in love with you again the moment I opened my eyes and saw you at the hospital. Even if my mind didn't remember, my heart never forgot you. It's always yearned for you. Cedric's eyes shone as he wrapped his arms around Vesper, embracing him. I love you. Vesper gently broke the embrace, his hands cupping Cedric's face as he looked into his eyes. I love you too. Then, he leaned in and kissed Cedric again, a fervent, lingering kiss that held all the longing they both felt.